r/NoSleep. Posted by CIAHerpes. I found my family's corpses buried in the forest. So who has been living with me in my house? Part 4. The man said his name was Agent Kel Larson, and what he told the group mostly lined up with what he had told me when I had ambushed and beat him. Their secret government agency, which he would only call the Cleaners, had been alerted to the presence of a potential anomaly in our little town. Whoever had alerted them had made it sound like it was only a couple scattered cases of families being replaced, but when they arrived, they found the trickle had turned into a tsunami. Townspeople flooded 911 with calls around the time I had called, until they had to turn off the service and deliver a pre-recorded message announcing that emergency services were suspended. It didn't help that most of the police were themselves either replaced or being attacked by psychotic family members. And so we began to contain and eliminate the anomaly by the only means available, he said. Anytime a 911 call alerted us to the presence of a potential replaced family, we would go and exterminate the group, to prevent a further spread of the sickness throughout the community. Yet it got to the point where nearly every house on every street had become compromised. We began having to go from house to house, still quickly alerted to any 911 calls in the meantime until our agents became overwhelmed. That was when we found you hiding in your neighbor's house, and we were ordered to eliminate you and your family immediately. But we never got a chance to find your wife and daughter, due to circumstances you already know. We had to put all our resources towards tracking you before you escaped and potentially spread the contamination further, and then we planned to come back and exterminate the doppelgangers. After you ambushed me and tied me up, I sat there waiting for about 5 minutes for the rest of the group to come in my direction and free me. Then I began to give up hope of them finding me quickly. I still heard them talking far off through the trees, but they had stopped moving forwards. I was able to shimmy towards the face of the cliff and rub the cloth bindings against a jagged piece of rock until I freed my hands. By that point, I knew something had gone wrong with the rest of my group. For one, I could hear their screams echoing through the forest. I looked in their direction. Dozens of their bright LED lights still bounced around crazily, sending chaotic shadows reaching out everywhere. I couldn't tell what the hell was going on. I heard my team leader yelling orders, trying to get the men in line. Then the shooting started. All of the guns started firing at once, spraying hundreds of rounds in seconds. A blinding purple light shot out of the area, and instantly everything went deathly silent. The agent went pale as he recalled this, walking next to us over the rocky trail that wound up a hill and down into the next town over, which was located in a valley. I snuck close to the chaos, trying to see what was happening without getting directly involved. I needed to see so I could figure out the source of the anomaly. I thought I might be able to report it to my superiors and then we could work to quickly eliminate it, root and branch. I saw something in the ground, half buried. What stuck out had strange silver and gold spires, as thin as silk, as if they had been spun by some alien spider. They intertwined and interweaved in thin, tapering columns no more than a few inches wide at the base, rising 20 feet above the ground. The agents all stood around like zombies, not saying a word. They swayed slightly on their feet, like plants blown in a light breeze, their movements synchronized and eerie. It seemed like a single consciousness ran through them, controlling them like puppets. The purple light started up again, coming out in rippling waves. It moved out slowly, forming iridescent ripples in fractal patterns with grid-like energy that crawled through the trees and brush. I saw the silver and gold spires also begin to light up, glowing as the purple light formed some strange sort of cyclone around the spires, spiraling up around them in perfect circles. The mouths of all the agents dropped open at once as their flesh began to ripple and melt before my eyes. I started to crawl away quickly then, trying to make as little noise as possible. When I last looked back, I saw the tentacles growing out of their faces, like a parasite ripping its way out of someone's skin. He shuddered. "So what happens now?" Richie asked. "What is the next step for your organization when all the agents on the ground are dead? Or worse?" "Well, according to military doctrine, if the first line of ground defense is removed, the next logical step is to take the air," he said. "That's NATO doctrine, and the CIA and all other agencies generally follow the military principles outlined by the NATO generals and leaders." "So we can expect airstrikes?" I asked, horrified. He nodded. "Helicopters with machine guns, airstrikes, artillery shells, everything," he said. "This place is going to be lit up soon. We want to be as far as possible from the center of town as we can get. In the past, they haven't hesitated to use biological or chemical weapons on the entire area. Hell, one time I remember our group was assigned to a town where the water supply got contaminated by some sort of alien fungus that transformed the people into a hive mind. Most of the cleaners got wiped out on that one, and nearly all the CIA agents too. They ended up having to exterminate the whole area with nerve agents like sarin and cyclosarin until nothing was moving on the ground. The town is still blocked off by military roadblocks. They use the old line that a coal mine caught on fire underground and that it will burn for decades, but everyone higher up in the government knows the truth. We had progressed far up the trail by this point, and I could see the entire town below us. Not a single light shone in any of the houses. No cars drove by on the roads below. The place looked eerie and abandoned. Yet, occasionally, a scream of terror or pain would rip through the night, faint but clear, echoing up to the tops of the hills and through the trees until it faded out to nothing. I saw multiple helicopters crisscrossing the skies. They used giant spotlights to sweep the roads and the front and back of houses, looking for any sign of movement. Occasionally automatic weapons fire would begin shrieking from above, a sign that they had got another one, though whether they were murdering just doppelgangers or innocent civilians, or both, I didn't know. I wasn't even sure how many innocent civilians could still be alive after the chaos and bloodshed we had seen. Based on the fact that the helicopter machine gunner had started to target me before I killed him, I believed they were going around murdering anything that moved. Perhaps the anomaly had spread so fast that they thought they had no other options. As we examined the view under a cloudy nighttime sky, the first non-human craft began to blur across the horizon. They flew low, barely clearing the tree lines, and moved much faster than any jet. And yet, it gave off no sonic boom and didn't even make a noise. It moved forwards in a strange, jarring manner, jumping from one point to another in a blur, then suddenly slowing down. I only caught a glimpse of the craft, a tangle of silver and gold filaments that formed a lattice pattern across the massive body. It had the same kind of architecture as the spire's agent Kellarson described, being composed of thin, curving strands that rose up and down the body of the craft. It glowed a soft blue, giving off a low, humming sound and emanating a smell like ozone and freon. Moving in a graceful arch, it flew across the town like a great golden dragon. Behind it, I saw 3 fighter jets, furiously trying to catch up to the alien craft. They fired missiles which sprouted fiery trails and raced across the sky, smashing into the back of the craft's body. A flash of light pierced the dark sky as the missile ignited, its bellowing explosion echoing over the hills towards us a moment later. The craft came to a complete halt in the air, freezing in place as if a video had been paused. As the smoke and fire cleared, it still hovered there, the blue aura still surrounding it, its exterior totally intact. The fighter jets closed in on it, their engines screaming as they drew near. The blue light shimmering around the craft grew rapidly, forming a cloud that seemed to suck in the air around it. Jets of lightning began to burst out of the cloud, dozens of branching streams of energy that hit all 3 jets in an instant. Pieces of their planes exploded, flames leaping out of the shell. Then a second wave of lightning struck, and their planes dissolved into pieces. The cloud that surrounded the craft dispersed, blown away by the wind. Slowly, almost lazily, it started to move forwards again, its strange engines humming, filling the destroyed town with the scent of ozone as the victors flew away. We continued on our way, trying to make good time. Alice had started complaining about her leg hurting her after a couple miles. Richie and I had tried taking turns carrying her, but she was simply too heavy to carry in the dark over a trail filled with roots and rocks that stuck up, trying to grab a foot like a catcher catching a baseball. Her leg had started to bleed again, and I could see a red spot where the ersatz stitches lay. "This isn't good," Agent Kellarson said to us as the girl limped farther behind. "We might need to leave her behind." "There's no goddamn way we're leaving her behind," Richie whispered angrily. "If we don't get out of this town in the 3-hour timeline, we're all dead. You understand that, right? Should we sacrifice all of us for a girl who will die anyway if she's not out of town?" Agent Kellarson retorted. "We don't know that they plan to kill us at the end of the time limit," I said, thinking of the strange, tentacled face I had seen through the window and the glimpse of white, staring eyes behind the writhing appendages. I had seen them only for a moment, like a shooting star glimpsed out of the corner of the eye, but the intelligence contained in those strange orbs had been undeniable. I looked back, checking on Alice. She lagged further behind than ever. I groaned, stopping to go check on her. I heard a rustle through the trees as I circled back. My heart leapt as I spun towards the noise, raising the rifle. Behind the bushes, through the shadows and branches, I saw myself. I was wearing the same clothes, the same random hoodie Richie had given me. I had the same haircut, the same shoes, everything except the eyes weren't the same. They gleamed with insanity, shone with a psychotic rage powerful enough to dissolve reality. Behind myself, I saw the other members of our group scattered randomly in the distance: Alice, Agent Kellarson, and Richie, all standing behind trees or hiding behind bushes, peering out in the dim light that filtered through the brush. Alice had caught up with me now. She stood staring into the dark forest, her eyes filled with horror as she saw the doppelgangers, still as statues with insane rictus grins scarring every one of their faces. I remember the words of that tentacled abomination through the window verbatim, even now, months later. He had said, "We will keep the strong alive." I thought he meant survivors, but something was knocked loose in my mind as I considered the vagueness of it. Perhaps he meant that they would keep the doppelgangers alive if they killed their original? Maybe he had meant the strongest of the two entities, one insane and fearless, one rational and human. I raised the gun to fire on my doppelganger and take him out of the equation for good when someone tackled me from behind. I went flying forwards under the unexpected assault, my head smacking hard against a tree as the ground knocked the wind out of my lungs. The gun went flying over my head and landed a foot away as I lay there, seeing stars and trying to breathe. In a dreamlike state, I saw Al's doppelganger approaching me, reaching into the back of his pants for something. I breathed fast, willing myself to move, to go to the gun. My head swam and the world seemed dark. I felt blood dripping down my scalp, curving around my ear in a small stream. Al pulled out a claw hammer, the sharp end already covered in hair and blood. He grinned at me. "Time to get some work done," he said in his old man's trembling voice, running at me with the hammer raised. I heard yelling from Richie and Agent Kellarson as they turned and began coming back towards me, but they seemed so far away. I took a deep breath, and as Al lunged at me with murder shining in his face, I raised my foot up and kicked him square in the crotch as hard as I could. His trajectory as he came down with the hammer didn't change much because of it. I saw his eyes widen in pain, but the sharp end of the hammer was still whirring through the air towards my skull, his entire body following its path. I rolled away, hearing the hammer crash into the earth with a dull thud a moment later. Richie reached me then. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small paring knife as he ran forwards, something he must have grabbed from the kitchen before he left. As Al breathed hard on the ground next to me, his eyes unfocused and filled with pain, Richie brought the knife down in the middle of his throat. The entire blade disappeared, slicing through his flesh as easily as a diver slips through the skin of the water. He spasmed and kicked, choking on the blood as he inhaled. I heard a terrible, groaning, sucking noise as he tried to breathe. Bright red arterial fluid spurted in and out in time with his breath, bubbling over the handle of the knife. He looked at me, still grinning, slowly reaching over as if he wanted to hold my hand. I had regained myself by then after what was probably a mild concussion, rolling onto my feet and grabbing the gun. I stood up slowly and shakily, feeling like I wanted to vomit. I looked into the woods, wanting to eliminate my doppelganger before he could kill me. But, sometime during the struggle with Al, the whole group of them had disappeared.